Great. So welcome everyone. It's nice to gather as the Vermont Climate Council. We've got a 2-hour meeting today um, with some updates and sort of grounding ourselves in what's going on and what that means for your role as a council. Um, I can share my screen with the agenda. If you give me just 1 sec, I can do that. And thanks everyone else who's joining us, who's not a member of the council and wants to tune into our meeting today. I appreciate that. Our agenda today looks a little bit like this. It's on the website and probably someone just dropped in the chat, hopefully. Thanks, Liz. Yeah. So it's right on the website and um, we'll do our usual housekeeping minutes and the like. Liz has some written public input that's come in since the last time you all met as a council, so we can review that. That's our practice. Then we're going to go into a series of updates. And the first one will be legislative. There, Secretary Moore, with Joey Miller's help, is going to um, give us an update of what's happened. And we can discuss as a council sort of what that means for the implications of your work as a council. Then we're going to do an update from Jane and or Liz. I'm not sure who Jane's traveling today, so we'll see who actually is going to do that update, or maybe Lauren. You all let
I'll
me
do it
know.
if she's not here.
Oh, and Jane's here too. Okay, cool. Um, great. So, Climate Action Office update, and here all the work that's happening in implementation. And I think it's really important for you as a council to sort of be very aware of sort of how the state is implementing and how the Climate Action Office is doing implementation. That will include an update on the greenhouse gas inventory process and how to manage some real challenges with federal data. Um, and then we at 2 o'clock will be joined by the director, the executive director of the U.S. Climate Alliance. Um, and Casey will walk us through sort of how states are working together in this environment to drive change. So we'll get an update from Casey. That's pretty short. Again, a little bit of time to ask questions there. And then the final update we'll get is from Eric, who's here, about Vermont emergency management and what's going on with hazard mitigation grants and related efforts. We talked about this a little bit in our last meeting or 2 meetings ago, so we're not going to repeat that per se, but it is important to understand what's happening in that space. And also, Eric, if you're able to talk a little bit of how the federal government's changes are affecting Vermont. We'll take some public comment, and then at the end of our meeting, what we want to do is kind of like wrap it up with a conversation among each of you as counselors saying, okay, what does all this mean for our work going into the fall and into next year? Like what are we taking away from all this? That's our goal today. Um, and any questions about the agenda before we dive into it? Any thoughts or questions or friendly amendments? Okay, great. Before we jump in and do our normal like minutes and the like, I'll just remind everyone we're all here in one happy Zoom meeting, and so we encourage climate counselors and staff to get on your camera if you can, if you're in a place you can do that. If you are observing our meeting today and you're not a member of the Climate Council, we encourage you to leave your camera off until we get to the public comment period. Okay, so minutes are attached in the document. You can click through and take a peek at them. This is from our last meeting in March. Uh, and I'm just looking. Yeah, if the way it works now is it's just on the website. You scroll further down, you'll see the minutes. I'll just give folks a moment to poke back into those minutes. Okay. Any any concerns with the minutes or suggested edits to the minutes from our March meeting? Anyone need a little more time with them?
Move their approval.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And the good news is we don't need to use Robert's rules, but I do appreciate that. So let's, as long as there's no concerns and no requests for more time, let's consider them approved. Thanks, Chris. Okay, great. So, wonderful. So let's dive into our agenda. And the first thing, Liz, you want to give us an update of what we got for written public comment?
Yeah, and I will try to share my screen so folks could see it. Okay, I think folks could see. We got 2 written public comments since the last climate council meeting, both related to transportation. The first comment has concerns about EVs, discusses national speed limits. The second topic area also concerns EVs, and speaks to hydrogen when it comes to transportation. So those are the 2 public comments, and I'm happy to provide them in the chat as well.
Okay. All right. So as is usual, if comments come in, we'll share them with you at the top of the hour, at the top of the meeting. If there's a lot of comments, we'll share a summary and give you a link to all of them. If there's just a few, we'll just share them like this. Okay, great. Thanks, Liz. So why don't we jump in, and Secretary Moore, you're on deck to start off with the legislative update, and then Joey, please jump in and compliment, and then let's have a little conversation about it.
Liz is
Over to
going to
you.
bring up the presentation on her screen. So
Okay.
for just a second to do that. Can you just, yeah, we can see it.
Great. We see it just great.
Yeah. All right. So there were a considerable number of bills this last legislative session that were taken up by the legislature. Several of them made it across the finish line to the governor. I believe at the end of the day, there's one bill with a tie to climate action that was vetoed, several that were signed into law, including, I think, things that have been updated since S212 has since been signed into law. I think if we scroll down a little bit further to the next page, maybe, Liz, let's see, there's one more. Oh, maybe I am wrong. Oh no, S710 was, I apologize, was also vetoed by the governor, in addition to or H710 in addition to H727. In both instances, he did issue veto statements, and we can make those available if folks haven't seen them. So in explaining the action he took on the bill, I think the bill that probably has the most relevance maybe to the or specific relevance to the Climate Council's work really is H740, which is the greenhouse gas inventory and registry. I think, this team here in this room, myself included, and I know several members of the Climate Council, spent a considerable amount of time over the course of the session in various committees in the legislature, providing testimony and input onto H740. And really, I think the challenge became finding that $500,000 base appropriation to support the work. I know that legislators, particularly in the environment and energy committees, were also very strong proponents of this bill. But at the end of the day, I believe the reason it sort of stayed stuck and didn't make it past that committee of conference was because they really couldn't find that $500,000 base appropriation in what was a really challenging fiscal year. Happy to answer questions. I know Joey's also may want to offer a few remarks. And just the last bill shown on this page, H915, the bottle bill was signed into law by the governor last week.
Thanks, Julie. Are there other things you want to point out in this chart? Because we kind of jumped around a little bit in the chart. Do you want to, say anything about anything else here?
I'm happy to answer questions if folks have them. I'm happy to speak in greater detail to most of the bills identified on this list. A couple of them may be better taken up by the Public Service Department if folks have specific questions. But I do think, I just guess would highlight the theme that the budget was challenging this year, and all signs point to the budget being even more challenging next year. That it's going to be very hard to find money for new initiatives, and I think it's just something for us to be aware of as we build out and our action plan or priority actions for the coming session.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
Maybe one last point, David, I would add is just, as many folks probably know, Representative Kathleen James, who's chaired the House Energy Committee, has decided not to seek re-election, as has Amy Sheldon, who chaired the House Environment Committee. So it means our two committees of jurisdiction, so to speak, in the House, or at least where most of these bills find their origin, will have new chairs next year. And we won't know who those chairs are likely until January.
Okay. Great. And so everyone knows on the agenda, you can click through and you can look at this chart for yourselves as we're going through here. So if anybody's there and just wants to click through and have the chart open on your own end. Joey, do you want to add anything about the sort of outcomes of the session to complement what Julie said?
Sure. I mean, just a little bit. First of all, just logistically, based on what Secretary Moore just said, it may be helpful to update and then republish this with the updates related to the B10 as well. I see there's still a reference to H600, which was the appliance efficiency standard bill. I just would get rid of that. And just clean it up so that we have a final version of what happened based on the fact that there's clarity on the fate of these bills. Secretary Moore said like 212 was passed, so just logistically. But just to round out, and happy to have a conversation and hear from others, but on 740, the greenhouse gas emission and fossil fuel reporting bill, definitely concur with Secretary Moore, very challenging fiscal times, but I would also note for people, it did get an appropriation. It successfully had an appropriation attached to it. It wasn't the full 500, but it was something in the order of about $300,000 that potentially would have enabled some of the start of that work. So, and I agree that will probably get more difficult, but obviously I'm disappointed as one of the top 10 recommendations of the climate action plan that it didn't advance to give us more clarity about fossil fuel consumption in the state of Vermont, especially in this moment of very skyrocketing and price volatile costs. So how that informs our efforts together moving forward, I think there's still a need there. So I very much look forward to talking with you all and others about how to fill the gap. And yeah, that's pretty much all I will say to round it out. But so one logistical thing of like, maybe we can clean it up so there's a new version of this document, and just lamenting the reality of 740, which I also think was sort of died under the weight of some politics and a very tight end of the session. Didn't move. So we've got more work to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Joey. Okay. We have a little time here, 10, 12 minutes to reflect on this. Any questions for folks who are less like in the weeds on this than say Secretary Moore and Joey are, like questions you have about what actually happened. Also, I think the reflection on what it means for you as a council is worth, starting to do now, even if we're going to like round it up at the end of today's meeting. So any quick reflections, quick questions? What does all this mean? Do you have any doubts about what actually happened?
Yeah, David, if you don't mind, I don't know if Commissioner Johnson has anything he'd like to add, but several of those bills were specifically in the energy space, Porch Solar among them, and I don't know if you'd like to maybe offer a few words of perspective from the department.
No,
Hang on. Okay,
thank you, but not really. I
Fair
don't. But thank you for making sure I had the opportunity.
Thanks, Carrick. Okay. Um, Counselors, thoughts, reflections, doubts. We have a little time here if folks want to talk through. Yeah, Rich?
Well, my reflection is that it's disappointing that we didn't get a reporting bill. That was a major recommendation of the council for good reason. And it provides that, or would provide, the foundation needed for a number of policies going forward. And I hope that in the next session, there will be an opportunity to revisit that topic and also to look really hard at how much money is really required to do at least the starting job of getting going with a reporting program. If we can't get 500,000, what can we do with less? But doing nothing seems to me to be unacceptable if we mean to meet our climate obligations at all.
Thanks, Rich. Right. Yep. Any other reflection? Okay. All right. Okay. Um, well, Rich, do you want to say something else? Or is that an old hand?
No, I'm trying to lower the hand.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Always. Zoom, our dear friend. Okay. Um, all right. Well, why don't we move on then and go to our next piece on the agenda? And so our next piece is an update from the Climate Action Office. Hang on just a second, I'm going to pull that up. So if Jane is on the road, but I think there you are. I see you. Why don't I turn it over to you? Also, there are slides linked to this agenda item, so if folks want to have those slides up on your own in addition to what's being shared, happy to have that happen.
Do I sound okay?
We just started to hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Perfect. I'm surrounded by a lot of people, so I'm going to try to talk quietly and efficiently so I don't bother everybody. It's nice to see everybody, and thanks for letting me join while on the road. Excited to provide an update today on the work of the Climate Action Office over the last year, some current challenges that we're struggling with in different programmatic areas, and then foreshadow some of the work that's coming in the year ahead. And as you can see by Julie's company in the room, there's lots of other experts from the office who joined in today to follow up with any detailed questions that I might not be able to answer. So thanks to the staff for joining today. Make sure my slides go. Yes, okay. So you might recall in the past when I've structured this kind of an update for you all, I've done it by major programmatic area in the office, and I'm going to try to take the same flow today and tack. And what I'll ask or suggest, David, if it makes sense, knowing that each slide is kind of hefty with words, and I'm going to talk quite a bit on each slide, I think I'll pause since we have such an amount of time after each slide and just see if there's some specific questions, since there isn't a ton of overlap between each slide. They really are just represent distinct areas of work. So I'm going to focus on, well, what I don't have on this slide is one of the key successes in cutting climate pollution is bringing Lauren Ashcroft on board. So I hope everybody at this point has really gotten to know Lauren. And Lauren is leading our climate mitigation work. She's supported now by Colin Smythe, who's come back to the Climate Action Office. He's taking on a new role within the Climate Action Office focused on the technical analysis and modeling work needed to support much of the programmatic work and policy development that the office does, both in service of A&R programmatic policy work, but really the broad spectrum of work that the Climate Action Office does in support of cutting climate pollution in other agencies collaboratively with VTrans and the Energy Department, Public Service Department, et cetera. So it's really great to be staffed back up and have really great staff here. So again, as we go through this slide, Lauren and Colin can fill in anything that I might miss and then answer questions that you all might have. So obviously from both Secretary Moore and Joey, you both heard a bit about the greenhouse gas reporting program and H740. I still think it was a great success over the last year. The research and work that our office did to put together the recommendation on behalf of the Climate Council's recommendation for all of you back in December led to a lot of great understanding, relationship, and work with other agencies in Vermont, as well as other states like New York, who are working to stand up greenhouse gas reporting programs right now as well. While we weren't successful getting it across the finish line, we are continuing to debrief and think about the learning that we took from putting that recommendation together and what we can do now, understanding that there are real data challenges that I'll speak to in even more detail on the monitoring and tracking slide I have and the greenhouse gas inventory. But that fuel reporting program that we would have stood up would have given us a lot of great data and accuracy, and namely one of the things that's missing quite a bit, or most substantively, I would say, is that we do not have any, really, I'll just say, any idea how much biofuel content there is in home heating right now. We're doing some investigative work to see if with tax and others about the content, but there is nowhere that home heating report on biofuels, and that for us is really hard for us to then accurately reflect the greenhouse gas emissions in that sector, the RCI sector, in their inventory. So again, it was a lot of work, research. It didn't make it across the finish line, but that work wasn't in vain. We'll continue to collaborate with other agencies, as well as continue to think about how we bring this back with the legislature in the coming year. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a program that is a cap and invest, for folks who don't know, on the electricity sector that Vermont has been part of for since its inception. That program itself went through a model rule update over the last 2 to 3 years. It took for all the states that are part of RGGI to come to an agreement on what the new cap, the new trajectory for emissions would be over time. And as a result, when that program review is completed, we need to update our model rule here in Vermont and do a rulemaking. I'm happy to report that Colin, who's taking over RGGI, has stepped in and is learning under Brian Woods, who's transitioning out of our office, and Lauren and Rachel Stevens all stood that rule up last week with LCAR, and that rulemaking package is now with the Secretary for her final review to be filed with the Secretary of State. So we're excited about RGGI, happy to talk a little bit more, and excited that it sort of made it through without a lot of hubbub, because as you may be watching RGGI or understanding, there's a lot of volatility right now with the allowance prices, and there was some concern around, questions about our rulemaking, et cetera, but we are confident that our rulemaking actually and the update to the program rule isn't what's impacting the allowance prices. We also developed a comprehensive climate action plan built off of the work that you all did with the climate action plan. You might recall that one of the grants that we received through the Inflation Reduction Act was the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, a $3 million pot of funding that's been supporting staff such as Liz, as well as grant and contract implementation. And there were a number of requirements for that grant for us to keep us in compliance, one of which was developing a comprehensive climate action plan. Many states, because 48 of the 50 states took advantage of these grants, for those many states, these GCAPs are their climate action plan. For us, it was really just a chance to dial in a little deeper on some modeling analysis with the recommendations from the climate action plan. And that is on our website if folks are interested in seeing it. It was due last December. Around struggles, we did have staff transition, so we've been a little slow on getting up to speed on some things, but as I highlighted at the beginning, we're really building back up, and our core staff are really great in helping to support our work. And one of the things around the signing statement that you might recall that Secretary Moore led, and many of you signed on to as well, not just administration, but also legislative appointments, really acknowledged that to this point, much of the modeling we've done for the climate action plan has looked at the question, what number of measures do you need to deploy to hit a target? And we haven't looked at, if you had this many dollars and wanted to look at upfront cost coupled with societal benefits and the other co-benefits of climate action, what would you get for emissions reductions? And so you'll see on my priorities for 2026-27, one of them includes updates to our business as usual scenario, reflecting a lot of the federal rollbacks that you'll learn more about from Casey when he joins us at 2 o'clock today, as well as some updated mitigation scenarios centering upfront costs and looking at different spending implementation costs and how many emissions reductions you would get from different spending regimes on mitigation measures. We're also complementing that with thinking about what Vermonters want us spending money on, and you'll learn later in my slides about a survey that we're undertaking right now in the state. We also are working really closely to stand up the Climate Superfund program, not directly related to emissions reductions, as you all know, but fit nicely on the slide. And our office has been working really closely with the Treasurer's Office around the cost assessment, and our roles and responsibilities are now starting to come up against the clock. And we've recently offered a position to a climate paralegal who's going to be working with the Office of General Counsel in the agency to develop to complete the jurisdictional nexus memo to hold oil companies accountable, and then think about how we build a record for those companies who do business in Vermont to ultimately send the cost demand letters to in 2 years from now through our rulemaking. So that's a big lift for our office that we're excited to be actively moving forward now. And then finally, just one example of some programmatic work that the office is doing. We're successful in receiving a $100,000 grant from the U.S. Climate Alliance to partner with resilience staff in our office to think about how we collaborate with farmers to develop a tool that the Ag Agency first worked closely with American Farmland Trust on around resilience planning. And beyond that, how do we add on and quantify the sequestration benefits of different ag practices? So we'll be working closely with the American Farmland Trust on that grant implementation, and then continuing to part with the Ag Agency as well on that. I'll pause there and see if folks have questions, knowing that was kind of wide-ranging, the topics I hit on.
Thanks, Jane. Any questions for Jane about this part of the work, like this work stream around cutting climate pollution? Again, we'll have other work streams in just a sec, but any questions about this? Jane, is this where you were going to talk about the greenhouse gas? No, that's
Not
later.
yet.
Okay,
It's
great.
coming.
Okay.
And
Any
folks can
questions?
ask questions on any slides whenever they want, but I thought so I'll go back if anybody does. And if not, please ask away at the end.
Jane, I might just add a little bit to the Reggie piece. In part because Reggie hasn't been particularly contentious here in Vermont. But there is have been a lot of questions and concerns being raised regionally as we go through the rulemaking process. Each of the 11 participating states needs to adopt the rules that Jane described. Every state has a somewhat different process and timeline. There are a couple of states that have already completed this work. I would say, though, we're in the front half of states in terms of the rulemaking process, and just the Reggie market has seen a lot of activity, maybe even verging on volatility, particularly when it comes to the secondary market. So not when auctions are being held and allowances are being sold, but sort of what happens in the period between quarterly Reggie auctions. And so there has been a lot of media interest, at least in like the energy trade press and other places. So the fact that our package has moved through the LCAR process is a really positive sign. And, you know, Vermont plays a small role in Reggie, but I think an important one, and the ability to sort of add another state to the column of states that have completed the adoption of the rule changes following program review is really important, and just want to highlight that because people may be seeing concerns being raised about Reggie and some of the price volatility that's been in the media recently.
Thanks, Julie. And for folks on this call who don't know, the money that Vermont receives from Reggie goes directly into weatherization programs in the state of Vermont. And since I came into the Secretary's office, it's lifted up from roughly 2 to 4 million a year in the state coming in to what's forecast because of that price increases to be anywhere upwards of $12 million this year.
Thanks, Jane. Jared?
Thanks, David, and thanks, Jane, for the presentation. I just wanted to offer a comment on a couple of the bullet points on your slide, Jane. The second one under struggles in terms of modeling, looking at upfront costs, and then the second one under priorities in terms of updates to the baseline and mitigation scenarios. And I recognize that some of this might just be a limited amount of space and a limited number of characters to convey complex topics. But if I heard you right, Jane, I think that one of the things you were talking about is the real need to update the baseline and mitigation scenarios because of changes in the federal policy and regulatory environment, which is absolutely true. But as I think about the baseline and mitigation scenarios, especially the connected economic analysis, I think it's also important that we update it given how significantly energy prices and forecasts of energy prices have changed. I'll just share with folks here. I don't know how many folks have seen it, but at Energy Action Network, we have been tracking what's been happening with gasoline, diesel, and fuel oil prices in Vermont, especially since the beginning of war in Iran. And we just published an analysis last week that looks at how much those price spikes have cost Vermont consumers in the last 3 months, and it's about $124 million. And so when we think about upfront costs, but as you mentioned here, but also as I always try to point out, and I think is very important for all of our modeling, not just upfront cost, but lifetime costs and savings, getting updated energy price forecasts on the fossil fuel side, as well as, other energy sources side, I think will be really important, as well as updating the policy and regulatory kind of framework and baseline. But I'll put this link in here in case folks are interested to see that price and cost analysis.
Thanks, Jared. You said you had one other point you wanted to.
Just connecting those two bullet points, because I think
Okay,
they're related, that it shouldn't just be upfront costs. We need to be looking at lifetime costs and savings. And there was economic analysis that was connected to the baseline and mitigation scenarios that I think needs to be updated, not just because of changed policy and regulation, but also because of significant changes in energy prices, especially the volatility and spikes in the fossil fuel markets.
Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Jared. I should say we've been working really closely for about 4 to 6 months with the Transportation Agency, Andrea on this call, as well as Public Service Department, multiple staff at Public Service Department to update our business as usual model. And that does include what you're referencing, energy forecast, et cetera, and a lot of restructuring of the BAU model around some questions that some of the other agencies had. Lauren can clarify if I'm wrong. And while the BAU has been updated significantly, it actually hasn't changed course quite much at all, if I'm correct. So the BAU is relatively still the same on track scenario that you all saw back in June when we did it for the climate action plan. Of course, even with all those new assumptions baked in, which is interesting. And I'll pause just to make sure I didn't say anything out of turn. Lauren, is that correct?
Jane, so we had a presentation on the BAU just a couple of weeks ago, and what we were seeing was that economy-wide, it was quite consistent with what you saw in the last version, but there were some minor changes on a sector-by-sector basis. But the economy-wide BAU and its forecast looked very similar to what they looked like in the previous cap.
Great, thank you. And then I will clarify, Jared, just for us, on the scenarios, we are looking at, and we just had a really robust conversation last week about being very clear to make sure that we say upfront costs and benefits, so we don't forget to say benefits, but looking at different spending scenarios around emissions reductions. So this is different than the social cost of greenhouse gases. This is actually looking at state dollars. And if you spend 10 million of incremental money or 40 million or 100 million, what emissions reductions would you get for that? And that's the kind of analysis that we're interested in doing right now, understanding that, what I'm interested in doing right now.
Thanks, Jane. And I appreciate that clarification. And I would just say that I think that when we look at the return on an upfront investment, it's important not just to look at the emissions reduced, but also dollar savings as a result of, especially if consumers move away from expensive fossil fueled equipment.
Thank you. And yes, we all agree.
Great. Let's move on to the next slide.
Okay. So resilience and adaptation. We, for many of you, I think you're aware that while we were working on the Climate Action Plan, we were also collaborating very closely between the Climate Action Office and the Treasurer's Office to develop a resilience implementation strategy on behalf of the state. The RIS was intended first and foremost to identify and assess where resilience and adaptation work was already happening in state government and use that as a springboard to think about opportunities to enhance that work and build off those successes, as well as opportunities for completely new work that we had not been doing in state government. That work was complemented by a cost analysis that the Treasurer's Office did for us, and that work was published last September. From that, we had some, not huge amount, but about $500,000 in revenue in the Climate Action Office that we've used as seed money to advance specific projects from the RIS. And we've been working really closely with different programmatic areas in A&R, as well as with Vermont Emergency Management and elsewhere to move forward some unique opportunities. And it's been a real success. We also obligated ourselves to think of this as a living and breathing document that will be updated again in 1 year and then comprehensively redone every 4 years. So it's a great success. And Marian, it's really a work plan and vision for the resilience and adaptation work in our office that Marian leads. We also have been working really closely with the Treasurer's Office, as I mentioned on the previous slide, to develop a cost assessment for the Climate Superfund. This work is being led out of the Treasurer's Office, but is done in collaboration and coordination with A&R, since that work will be handed to us in order for A&R to use it in our cost demand letters to the oil companies. It's a really tremendous piece of work that is taking a lot of time, in large part because we see it as having significant value beyond the Climate Superfund law, thinking about the economic impacts as well as the cost to adapt to climate change. So it's a really exciting time to be working on it. We have an excellent contractor, and that work is due to be presented to the legislature next January. We've also, for a year and a half now, been working with Styler Consulting to develop municipal climate planning guides. This was actually an idea that Marian and I had after the initial climate action plan, when many municipalities reached out to Marian and I, a large part saying, there's this great new state climate action plan, but how do we take it and use it for municipal action? And we were really kind of scratching our heads saying it isn't really meant to be scaled for municipal action, but wanted to be helpful and supportive of communities who wanted to do work at that level. And rather than thinking about one guide that was really like, how do you write a town climate action plan? We actually pivoted and heard from municipalities around, we do a lot of planning. We already do planning that touches climate in so many ways. How do we actually just enhance those plans? So we've developed a municipal planning guide to work on your town plan with a climate lens, a a capital planning guide to how you would develop a capital plan for your municipality with climate in mind, and a social resilience guide, which is really supposed to be the foundational work for any kind of planning and work within your community. Those are currently being piloted with 6 communities and through RPCs, and the final guides will be published at the end of this year. And we're currently hiring a resilience coordinator underneath Marion, who really will have this municipal capacity focus, because there's a lot of great tools that the Climate Office, large part directed through the GWSA and others, have stood up these technical tools that help provide capacity to municipalities, but without staff to really help, we're afraid they'll fall on the wayside. So Marion's been re-envisioning what that work looks like out of our office. And then we stood up the Cowie partnership with a grant from the Climate Alliance as well. And it's so funny, I say Cowie all the time, and I love the acronym, and you would think it would have no problem for me remembering, but it's Outdoor Workforce Initiative, but I have a really hard time remembering what the C is. But it's a $100,000 grant from the Climate Alliance given to the VOBA, Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance, and it's facilitating a group of folks beyond VOBA, the Climate Action Office, Department of Labor, and VOREC, Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic. And now I'm going to forget what the C stands for in VOREC, but all of us meet regularly and are working to define what a resilience workforce is, and thinking about different career pathways to stand up jobs in that sector. So it's a really great partnership, and one that we're excited to continue to roll out through the end of this year. I will say we've had some transition in staff. Evan Horn left our office, similar to the mitigation staff. It's allowed us to re-envision the roles and responsibilities. As I alluded to, the new person won't be a resilient lands coordinator, but rather a resilience coordinator focused on many of these municipal tools. And then we've also acknowledged that through all the technical work that we've been doing, there isn't consistency in the downscaled modeling that the state uses in different ways. That's both through our municipal vulnerability indicators tool, the cost assessment. It all relies on good consensus data around what are the impacts of climate change going to be. And that's something we've been working really closely with Leslie Ann on as well, to think about how we get to a place where there's agreement on that. So one of the ways we're doing that in the coming year is we're actually moving the municipal vulnerabilities indicators tool, which for many of you who have been following along with the Climate Council from day one, it was a requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act to actually develop a municipal vulnerability index. We actually, in the first iteration of that work, did an indicators tool that was more interactive and didn't rank communities. We're now looking to stand up an adaptation and risk index and have a contract moving forward this summer for a 2-year project there. Part of that work will be really closely thinking about the downscaled modeling in partnership, not only with the contractor, but also with Leslie Ann and the Office of the Vermont State Climatologist, where we've recently signed an MOU between the Climate Action Office and the Office of the State Climatologist, really highlighting the unique expertise that Leslie Ann's office has, especially in the space, to hopefully help her support state government with these kinds of things. And I'll just highlight that we have some additional seed money in this year's fiscal budget to continue to focus on RIS implementation. Some of that work will be around standing up. There's a lot of hydrologic modeling that's happened in different watersheds, pulling that into one tool for folks to access. And then we're continuing to partner with the mitigation staff and American Farmland Trust on the resilience tool with farmers. I'll pause there again and see if there's any questions. And I have 2 more slides. So it's a lot of information, but hopefully just a few slides.
Stephanie, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you for that, Jane. Really a lot of fascinating information. Selfishly, I have a question about the 3 municipal climate planning guides. They sound fantastic. In my own town, where our new plan needs to be finished before the end of the year. And it sounds like these aren't going to land until the end of the year. I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that, but I'm thinking, oh gosh, I would love to see those 3 things and make sure that the people who are working so hard on ours see that kind of language. And what I would hate for us to do it and then look at it and see what we missed. Is this something that the regional planning commissions, that they already are seeing, so that in their advice to us, we're getting it a different from another in another way, but it's still the same stuff? Or is this something that we could actually see a draft of? I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer it in two ways. One, RPCs are actually have a grant with our office to help support municipalities with these kinds of questions. And so, but they're working on that specifically with the pilot communities. But Bennington, you're in Bennington RPC, right?
Yes.
Is that the, yeah, your community. So yes, and we're working closely with folks there. So my second would be that we should talk and understanding and talk with Marion and think about how we might be able to help.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah. Other questions for Jane about what the Climate Action Office is doing in this space of resilience and adaptation? Okay. All right. Jane, next.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I just want to, no worries. I just want to remind everybody that Erica Arsario is our climate change analyst, data and progress analyst. And last year was the first year she worked to complete the greenhouse gas inventory on our behalf. We, in that line, also are required to be standing up a measuring and tracking progress tool, which we're now calling the Climate Action Tracker. That's a requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act too, and it looks beyond emissions reductions measures to resilience as well as outreach and engagement, and thinks about like what are the tools we're deploying, how many and what that would yield progress in any one of those areas. That's really enabling us to work across government to think about how this would be most useful for other agencies as well. And so beyond the inventory last year, a major focus of Erica's work was pulling in and standing up a data governance team. And I should mention that outside of government, staff from Jared's organization, Energy Action Network, as well as staff from VEIC sit on that data governance team, in large part VEIC because they collect a lot of the data that we would want to use in a tool like this. And then Jared's organization in large part because they use a lot of that data to make easily communicable materials as well as produce the reports that he alluded to earlier. So that data governance team is really one that's thinking about data now across state government and thinking about what we need to ensure we have strong communications on climate action progress. This is where David alluded to the issue of federal partner on data and the greenhouse gas inventory that I know many of you wanted me to speak about. We're in the month of June, and June is the month that we have been working annually for the last few years to produce the updated greenhouse gas inventory. And you might notice that we don't have one published yet for 2023. Just a reminder for folks, we typically run about 2.5 years behind the calendar year with the greenhouse gas inventory. It's always been an issue around some of the data that we receive from the federal government and the timing and how we stay as accurate as possible with the calendar year. But now the federal government has also let go of all of the staff who used to produce this data in the EPA, as well as stopped committing to producing what's called the state inventory tool, which is what we use and the SIT modules to produce the greenhouse gas inventory. So while that affects Vermont in a number of sectors with the inventory, it really affects us with the ag sector and the land use sector. But then the SIT modules also affect us with respect to how we calculate the emissions for our largest sectors, the transportation sector and the RCI sector. So we're in a hold pattern about being able to produce our inventory. The good news is that the inventory, the staff who produced these tools have landed at the University of Maryland and have committed to continuing to produce the SIT modules as well as the downscaled data. And so our best expectation is that those SIT modules will be released this summer. We continue to collaborate with the U.S. Climate Alliance and other states who are in the same situation as us. We've heard from our partners in other states in Maine and Massachusetts that they are all waiting and will be using the same tools as us from University of Maryland. but we're in a holding pattern. The other concern I'll just say is that for us, 2023 is our last year before we have our next year, which is the year 2024 inventory that is legally tied to our GWSA requirements. So not only have we been concerned about producing this year's inventory, we've been concerned about getting consistency around when we'll have the modules next year so that we can produce our inventory in a timely way next year as folks are interested in that. So I'll just say, stay tuned. Our hope is that by this fall, we'll actually publish the 23 inventory and won't be so far behind next year with the 24 inventory. We also have a contract to stand up our climate action tracker, which is the tool that looks at all the things we're doing to address climate action that actually yields emissions reductions as well as resilience benefits, et cetera. And that contract goes into effect, I think it was only just recently signed or is in the process of being signed still, but will take about a year to stand up that tool, which we're excited about. And then finally, folks might remember that we were petitioned to do a life cycle analysis rulemaking, and we've been working through some challenges with a paywall for the protocol that the public would need to access for that rulemaking. And we're hopeful that we're going to crack that nut anytime soon and finish that rulemaking this year. So I'll just pause there again and see if folks have any questions before I round us out with communications and community engagement.
Questions? Okay. All right, let's go community engagement.
Good thing that you guys ran early on the last part. Apparently I can talk, so. Okay, community engagement and communications. So some key successes over the last year was that we were able to use some of the funding that we had through that climate pollution reduction grant to graphically design and plain language the climate action plan. And then we had some one-time funds to do the same for the resilience implementation strategy. So I think we've rolled that out with all of you, but those documents are way nicer than our last climate action plan, and they're on our website. I think they're really great tools. We reference them all the time with the public, and I hope many of you will use them as well. As part of that work, we also worked to develop climate stories that were graphically designed, and we embedded those in the climate action plan and also use that as separate pieces of work in other communications and with the public when we're out meeting with them. So I encourage you to look at those too. They're on our website. And already in 2026, we've done 10 engagement events, whether those were focus groups around resilience implementation strategy with non-English speaking Vermonters up in Chittenden County, or other public events rolling out the RIS, the climate action plan, et cetera. We've had a hard time and continue to talk about it in-house about how we frame climate solutions in a time of affordability crisis, and have been thinking about how we test messages in that space. And it's actually a nice tee up for the Climate Alliance and Casey, because they've done some significant polling and communications testing on this and have been a great partner in thinking about the messaging, knowing that it is a critical solution in a time of affordability to help people with their long-term bills. So priorities for this coming year is, as I mentioned, we have just rolled out a survey. You could be like me, who actually got hit and asked to do the survey and had to decline, but we're trying to get a statistically representative sample to ask Vermonters about climate action in a time of an affordability crisis and how they rank it amongst other priorities and what they would like to see us working on. We're hoping to use that to inform some of the measures that we prioritize in some of the scenario modeling that we're doing in our updated mitigation scenarios. So that first round of polling is live now. We should have answers within as short as less than 2 weeks from now for the overall survey that we're also doing represented an oversized sample of rural low-income Vermonters as well as BIPOC Vermonters. So that will come back, and that work will also inform the development of the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which is starting to tee up for 2028, if I got that right. And then finally, I'll just say Sophie, with the help of CBI and the engagement team, is building a portfolio of engagement events for this summer, meeting Vermonters where they are, building off some of the questions from the survey, and then also thinking about partnerships with other state agencies to be effective in the work that we're doing. Here in A&R, we're very focused on thinking about the successful implementation of the Flood Safety Act, as well as how that work tees up with some of our technical analysis projects like the Vermont Adaptation and Risk Index. So that's it.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so much going on. Thoughts for Jane about these things, the survey that's going on, how it's related to the comprehensive energy plan, anything else engagement-wise you're curious about from what's happening in Jane's office or the office that Jane leads? Any quick reactions how it relates to your work? Yeah, Stephanie?
I was just going to say again, thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate the way you lay out your reports. It's really clear for me, one of the newer members, and at a time where it's hard not to feel discouraged and hopeless. I see this, and it's a good reminder. Okay, so yep, this is where we are, but these are the things that there are accomplishments, and we have goals, and there will be more accomplishments to come. Just have to hang in there. So thank you very much for that. It's really helpful. And I will contact you separately about the guides.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I appreciate that. I also appreciate you putting the Climate Outdoor Workforce Initiative in the chat, and the fact that I can't remember the word climate. It's just real funny.
I thought you'd get a kick out of that, Jane. All right. Any other reflections of what this means for you all as a council, like having the Climate Action Office in the state of Vermont, plugging away, doing interesting work? Any other reflections before we pivot over to the U.S. Climate Alliance? Chris?
Yeah, hi from Southeast Vermont. I'm just wondering if there are plans on how nuclear is going to re-enter the statewide chat, because we've had a little experience with it down here for decades, and right now it'd be good to kind of let people know like how that conversation is going to be organized. I mean statewide, right? Because nuclear wouldn't necessarily just be a Southeast Vermont chat, but since a potential developer has now mentioned that in the press a few times, it'd be probably good to have some kind of structured conversation about it for the public to know what that's going to look like. And that's not on you, Jane, but for this group, for the Climate Council, what is the role of in-state nuclear? What does that look like? How does that relate to climate action? How does that relate to siting and all those good things that people here, at least, are asking a lot of questions about?
Chris, that's I feel like that's like a tee up, because it's one of the comments that I know Casey will make in his presentation, and I want others to ask any questions they have, but I also am mindful Casey's on, and I'm more than happy, David, to provide an introduction to Casey when we're ready.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, and just before we pivot over to Casey, and good to see you, Casey. I just see a note from JL in the chat, like want to learn more about the American Farmland Grant and what the program will entail. So maybe that's a direct follow-up you all want to do, or if there's something quickly you want to say, Jane, while we're all here. Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up directly with you, JL, offline too, to learn more about it. But it's the continuation of a program that was started at the Agency of Ag to work directly with American Farmland Trust around a resilience planning tool that they work directly on piloting with farmers in the state. And now this additional revenue that actually we were able to bring in through the U.S. Climate Alliance will help add on the ability of those same conversations and planning tools with farmers to actually also work to calculate the sequestration benefits of those practices as well. So we're working directly with Alyssa White, who many of you might know as she's been on the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee for a long time and is now the Vice President of American Farmland Trust. So but I'm happy to share the grant with you offline and talk with you about it, Jay.
Super. Okay. Right. And a shout out from Shayla about all the work that's getting done. Jane, well, would you like to introduce Casey?
Sure. I feel like, David, did you just get to introduce
I
Casey
know.
last week too at the Climate Alliance? That's
At
great.
the well,
At
at the
the
Maine's
Maine
Climate
Climate
Council,
Council meeting.
Casey and I were hanging out. So yes. But
Yeah,
Jane, go ahead,
great.
please.
Well, I really say this very truly that it's a pleasure to have Casey Kadams here with you all today to talk with you about the U.S. Climate Alliance and Vermont's role within it. Casey stepped in as executive director for the U.S. Climate Alliance right as I was taking on this role and starting to lean into the work for Vermont with the U.S. Climate Alliance. And it's been a real privilege to get to learn from Casey and see his leadership on behalf of the states and the Alliance. So Casey's going to talk with you all about the work that the Climate Alliance does at large on behalf of its member states. And then share some of the implications of the current federal administration and what it looks like for state leadership in the coming years. So really appreciate Casey taking the time to be with you all today. And I really encourage you all to pick his brain and ask questions as he wraps up today, because he has a wealth of information to offer us all. So thanks, Casey, for joining us.
That's an incredibly generous introduction. And I really feel like the table should be turned a little bit, because I feel like I get to learn so much from you, Jane, and from all of you in Vermont. And it's great to be with you. As David mentioned, I was last week at the Maine Climate Council, so I feel like I'm just sort of doing the rounds with our great Northeast friends. Although I will say I feel a little bit sheepish wearing a suit. I feel like I should have donned something a little bit more Vermonty with my attire, but my DC vibes are coming through. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do my best to navigate a slide deck while I talk. If I can't see you while I'm presenting, feel free to just interrupt me with any questions along the way, and I'll try to leave as much time as possible for questions. Oh wait, and I've started my presentation and not shared my screen. All right. Can you all see this okay?
Yep, it's perfect now.
Excellent. Great. So as Jane mentioned, I'm Casey Kadams. I'm executive director of the U.S. Climate Alliance. The Alliance is, I'm just going to show you who we are. You can see Vermont, obviously, on the screen, alongside 23 other states and territories who are all collectively committed to achieving, climate goals under the Paris Agreement and sustaining action with or without the federal government. What you're looking at is a coalition that was really built from the ground up. And what I want to make sure everyone on this call knows is that it is built to endure through this administration and through any future federal administrations. By their very nature, federal administrations are temporary, but through the U.S. Climate Alliance, governors and states who are committed to acting on climate change are ensuring that U.S. climate action is here to stay. We were formed back in 2017. At the beginning, we just had 3 states, Washington, New York, and California. We now have 24 states and territories across New England, the Pacific Northwest, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, the Southwest, and the Pacific. We collectively represent nearly 55% of the US population and 60% of the US economy. And Vermont has really been on this journey with us since the very beginning. It was actually Governor Phil Scott who joined the US Climate Alliance back in June of 2017, which was just days after the federal government first announced its withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. And nearly a decade later, our collective commitments still stand, and Vermont's climate leadership, alongside the other great governors who've been part of our coalition from the beginning, have really set the tone for the coalition that we have today. And it's really my pleasure to get to work with all of you and your fellow counterparts in other states across the country to keep this work going. As we mentioned earlier, the U.S. Climate Alliance is committed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement through 4 key commitments, which I'm not going to read out loud for you in detail. They're on our website. They're copied here for your perusal. But at a high level, what you should know is that we're working to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, net greenhouse gas pollution, in alignment with U.S. climate goals, including achieving overall net zero greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2050. I do want to note here, one of the important things about our climate goal is that it is a net emissions target, which critically relies not just on mitigating our emissions of greenhouse gas emissions from our highest polluting sectors like transportation, electricity, industry, and buildings, but it also relies on protecting our natural carbon sink. And I want to just sort of note that, because Vermont, you should take real pride in this, that your lands and waters play a really critical role in helping our collective carbon sequestration and helping us achieve our long-term net zero goals. Despite obviously the challenges and the strong national headwinds that we're up against, alliance states are continuing to make important strides towards their own goals, along with our collective goals, and are laying the groundwork for enduring progress in the years and even decades to come. One of the things that I always like to say at the outset that I think is often sort of like underappreciated is just how much our work on climate change is delivering co-benefits across a much wider number of sort of kitchen table issues that we know the American people are concerned about. I heard Jane talk a little bit about living in an affordability crisis, but what we know to be true is that climate solutions are also delivering cleaner air. They're delivering better preparedness for natural disasters. They're delivering cost savings to people's gas bills and their utility bills. They're driving economic growth. Our long-term progress so far at the Alliance has been a trajectory of lower greenhouse gas emissions by 24%, while we've driven up our GDP collectively by 34%. So we have shown that you can decouple economic growth from greenhouse gas pollution. We're creating good paying jobs, delivering reliable energy, and helping consumers access cleaner technologies that also offer them these cost savings. And so just want to sort of remind folks and ground folks in the real sort of kitchen table benefits that we're delivering. And so for the next few minutes, I'm just going to be sharing a little bit about where alliance states currently stand amidst the ongoing federal headwinds and thinking through a few questions with you all, which is like, how are alliance states continuing to make progress despite the shifting federal priorities? What does state level leadership look like right now? And how can Vermont join your fellow states in maintaining climate action momentum when national policy seems to be moving in the opposite direction? And Jane has shared with me, by the way, the background for the whale tails, and I was delighted to learn about them. And so I just love to learn more about Vermont, and I encourage everyone to share more about Vermont back with me. I'll just sort of ground us in the sober reality that we are facing significant headwinds. I don't want us to dwell too much on this because it's really easy to feel downtrodden by how much we're up against, but we know that there are a lot of national headwinds that we're facing, whether that's rollbacks of federal foundational rules and programs, efforts to undermine what we all know to be true is that the established scientific consensus behind greenhouse gas pollution and climate change. We know that the strain of sort of losing federal investments has impacted states' budgets, including in Vermont. There have been efforts to constrain clean energy deployment, preempt state authority, and obviously there's a lot of challenges that states are facing broader than just climate and energy. And as a coalition that serves governors, we know that governors have their eyes on a wide range of challenges that they're facing right now. What I want to really ground you all with in this moment is that it's easy to feel sort of lonely, I think, as a state, facing some of these challenges. And I really want to make sure you all understand that every state's in the same boat right now. And whether you're a big state or a small state, whether you're in a purple state, red state, or blue state, every state is facing really similar headwinds right now. And even our biggest states like California and New York are facing the same kinds of challenges that I think you all are in Vermont. And so what that means is collaboration and cooperation is our greatest strength in this moment. It is how we bind together and stick together, how we share resources, work through data challenges, give you all technical assistance and capacity to keep pushing forward. That's how we're going to continue to make progress. And I'm just going to go a little bit deeper, and this is not intended to sort of send scary, chills down anyone's spine, but just so you can visualize the real impact that this federal government's actions are having on our climate goals. What you see here at the bottom line of this sort of like dotted gray line, that is sort of where we were headed under the prior federal administration. And what we have at this sort of top black line is where we're headed under the current federal administration. So you're seeing obviously a pretty significant upward trend in greenhouse gas emissions compared to where we were headed by about 15%. And you can sort of see those wedges on the left side about where some of the biggest impacts are from things like the loss of clean energy tax incentives and waivers for clean car and clean truck rules are where some of the most significant impacts are. The other thing I want to make sure to point out is the line is still going down, right? And I think that it's easy to feel like we're losing a lot of ground such that we almost feel like we're going in reverse. And what we have shown to be true, what our modeling demonstrates time and time again, is we're going to continue to be headed in the right direction. We're going to be going slower than we wanted, but we're going to be headed in the right direction. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but like that's the most important thing I think right now is to focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions anywhere and everywhere that we can. And so what we're seeing across our coalition is that states are navigating those federal headwinds by setting their sights beyond this administration and into the next decade of climate goals. And so the work being done across our states looks a little bit different in every state based on your unique circumstances, your economies, your political realities. But we are seeing forward momentum and progress everywhere in different kinds of ways. And I think there's a lot to learn. So I'm going to go through just a few examples, but really just sort of want to encourage you to sort of keep your eyes on what other states are doing right now, because folks are finding a way to forge that path forward. Obviously, there's a lot of work underway to accelerate zero carbon energy sources. So there's a lot of work to both maximize wind and solar energy deployment before those federal clean energy tax credits expire. A lot of work to help projects start construction prior to July 4th of 2026. But there's also a growing momentum towards energy sources that are both zero carbon and can move forward even with the federal government that we've got right now. And we've seen that this federal government is very willing to partner with states on things like storage, nuclear, and geothermal. And so there's a growing movement amongst alliance states to embrace those energy sources that will help us sustain progress towards our goals during the period of time that we have different federal partners. There's a lot of work underway to sustain progress in the transition to cleaner vehicles. We know that transportation remains the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions across the alliance. Within that, the reality is that light duty vehicles are the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions across the alliance. And so everything we can do to sustain the build out of a fast, affordable charging network for people to be able to more reliably and comfortably transition to EVs is a great solution. There's a lot of work underway in states to help backfill the loss of federal incentives for cleaner cars. There's also just a lot of dispelling rumors and myths about clean cars. And I think obviously in the aftermath of the Iran war, where we've seen a really significant uptick in gas prices, we're also seeing a real growth in interest from consumers in used EVs, which often have a lower sticker price than new EVs, but offer really critical cost saving benefits at the pump. There's a lot of work to invest in climate resilience and to invest in natural climate solutions to ensure that healthy and resilient lands and waters continue to support our net greenhouse gas emissions reductions and removals. I'm just going to call out a few examples of things that are happening across the coalition, but I'm happy to go into more detail on any of these. We know that in New York, Governor Hochul has announced 2 solicitations to advance the development of gigawatts worth of new nuclear capacity in New York. So there, to the question earlier about nuclear, we're seeing that really across the board, across our coalition in every region, but New York has made very big strides in the development of new nuclear power. On the transportation front, Colorado has created a dedicated transportation funding source that has already delivered over $220 million for EV incentives, charging, transit electrification, and e-bike programs. That program started back in 2021, so those investments are not all coming during this administration, but it has allowed that state to, I think, shoulder some of the federal changes by providing some of that dedicated revenue stream for EV electrification or transportation electrification. I think you all know that Maine is a real leader on heat pumps in the country, and so they're helping sort of lead the charge. But you can see this happening sort of throughout the New England region and across the country to help take advantage of heat pumps and cleaner sources of heating and cooling your homes. In addition to a lot of investments in energy efficiency, which is obviously continues to be bread and butter critical to tackling emissions in the building sector. There's some really exciting work happening in the Midwest, in particular in Minnesota, around smart agricultural practices. They recently launched several grant programs to expand climate smart agriculture throughout the state, including $10 million to support organics management infrastructure, $12 million for food waste reduction, $1.5 million for fertilizer efficiency and water quality protection, as well as $6 million to help farmers purchase electric agricultural equipment. And so again, every state is sort of focusing on where their priorities and their economies are. And then in resilience, we'll give just sort of a nod to Connecticut, one of your sort of nearby states that is helping communities turn climate resilience plans into action by creating a new funding pathway for resilience investments. They're improving flood risk transparency and supporting long-term infrastructure investments through its resiliency improvement districts. So across our coalition, I think we've seen some very clear best practices that are ingredients for success in this moment. I'm going to list them. They're all listed here on the screen, but I will just say, being early, forward-looking, proactive about thinking about where you're going to be next year, 2 years from now, 5 years from now is always a good recipe for success. There's clearly a need to deepen engagement from state government to industries that we work with and to regulated entities and to stakeholders and advocates who are critical to our success. I think in this moment where we don't have a supportive federal partner, making sure that we develop and foster and cultivate all those partnerships outside of government is really critical. Making sure that we're sustaining progress towards our existing goals, right? Implement is the thing that I say over and over again. So whatever our goals are, just keep making progress in the right direction and make sure that we're celebrating those wins, celebrating progress and incremental change, even if it's not as fast as we want, making sure that we don't lose track of those benefits. Building on what works, I think we're seeing a lot of states try to look to their neighboring states to figure out what are solutions that have a proven record of success. What's something that 5 other states are doing that works really well that we might consider doing here? What's something that's happening in this state that is like a 5-year program that we can maybe extend to a 10-year program because we know it's successful? What's something that's working really well in one county and expand it out to 5 more counties? And so building on what works, I think, is a really key ingredient right now. And also a willingness to innovate and pivot, right? Sometimes we try something for several years, we find out that it's just not moving the needle in the way that we want, or it ran into headwinds that we weren't expecting. Making sure that we don't lose track of our long-term goals, our momentum, and being willing to say, okay, that didn't work. We're going to try something new and different this time. And I think that's a really key way to make sure that we continue to put one foot in front of the other these next few years. And I'll just leave you on the note just to say, and this is sort of my mantra to every state right now, is every amount of progress matters. I think that there's a lot amongst the climate community. There's a misconception that we can either win or lose on climate change, that we've either succeeded or failed, that we've either met our target or we missed our target. And the reality is that climate change is a gradient, right? It's not like a win or lose on off switch. The globe is warming, and the question is, how much will it warm? And we know that every fraction of a degree of avoided warming matters. It means jobs protected. It means communities safeguarded. It means investments secured. It means a growing, stable economy. And so 2 degrees is better than 1.5 degrees. 2.5 degrees is better than 3 degrees. 3 degrees is better than 3.5 degrees. And so my recommendation to everyone in this moment is anything we can do right now to keep making progress is a win. Every EV that is sold and gets on our roadways is a win. Every EV charger that is put in the ground is a win. Every acre of land conserved is a win. Every tree that is planted is a win. And so just, again, continue to focus on moving in the right direction, make as much progress as we possibly can. And we know that we will have windows for faster progress in the years to come. But in the meantime, we just have to keep moving forward. And so with that, I'm going to pull my screen share down. I hope that something about this presentation was useful. I'm happy to take any questions. And Jane, I think I'm turning it back over to you or to David.
Either of us is great. Thanks, Casey. And yeah, so this is an opportunity to sort of ask Casey like how the U.S. Climate Alliance is looking at this. If you have questions about what he just presented, would love to dive into some of that. What does it mean for states to take leadership in this moment? Let's take advantage of having Casey around, ask him a few questions, and figure out how this could be helpful for Vermont. So, counselors, what's on your minds? What would you like to ask Casey? Don't be shy. Yeah, Secretary Clark, go ahead.
Thanks, Casey. That was really interesting and informative. I'm really curious at the federal level, what are there partners that you are working with federally, either be it like congressional delegations or still allies in the federal government?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think certainly I think we have a lot of friends on the Hill, right? So I think throughout Congress and leadership in both parties, in both chambers. There are a lot of champions for clean energy and clean technologies. There's a lot of supporters for maintaining some of these foundational federal programs like EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program. Again, that's, I think, on both sides of the aisle. I think a lot of the movement towards preserving some of the clean energy tax credits during last year's reconciliation debates, again, had a lot of support from folks on both sides of the aisle. And it was ultimately a bipartisan effort to preserve as much of those incentives as possible. So certainly, I think there's a lot of friends, I think, in Congress. I will just say there's a lot of really great career staff working in every single federal agency who are doing their darndest to keep pushing forward, to keep the work of government moving forward in every way that they possibly can. And I want to just sort of give a nod to a lot of those folks, many of whom are unsung heroes and doing stuff maybe without a lot of fanfare, but doing a lot of really critical work. And that is happening, I think, in every agency. And so whether that's, the Department of Interior or Department of Energy or EPA, there are important programs that are continuing to move forward and that continue to be run by well-meaning, great, knowledgeable, experienced staff. And I will say that there are also programs that are moving forward even by, Trump administration appointees who, clearly are committed to and support investments in grid resilience and grid reliability. Clearly, there is support and forward momentum for investments in geothermal and in nuclear. And so I think there's a lot of innovation happening across alliance states and territories to sort of find anywhere and everywhere that we can find a partner. And in places where we can't find a partner, obviously sticking by, our ideals, our values, our goals. And so I think that there is certainly a lot of that happening across government right now. I hope that helped, but happy to take that any further if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions? Yeah, Rich.
Well, yeah, let me just start by thanking Casey and the Climate Alliance for the work that you do. I've had the privilege of working with the Climate Alliance in some other states, and it's provided a lot of support to states in a variety of ways. I just want to thank you for that, and thanks for the presentation. The Your point about the cumulative impacts of all of the actions that are being taken is really an important one to keep in mind as we sort of struggle with what feels like sliding backwards. We're still making progress, just not as much progress as we hoped for. I think it's great of you to make that point. And in addition, the fact that the Climate Alliance can help to facilitate sharing across the states and spreading good ideas and innovative practices across the states, it's just super important. And, good on you and keep it up, please. Uh, I'm going to close with a question, which, something you didn't touch on, but which we're seeing in our work across the country, and that is the climate impacts and cost impacts on customers of data centers and other high impact loads that are kind of pounding the power system across the country. And does Climate Alliance have a program going on helping states to address both the cost and environmental impacts of data center growth?
It's a great question. So the short answer is yes. We formed a cohort for every single U.S. Climate Alliance member state. I want to say end of last year or very beginning of this year, Jane. I don't know if you remember when we stood up our cohort, but we've been meeting now for probably about 6 months or so and bringing states together. We run a weekly newsletter where we share information out with some of the latest news, updates, think pieces. Because I will say, this is an area where there's a lot of activity. Governors across the U.S. Climate Alliance are taking a number of actions that are, relevant and specific to their states, their circumstances, their needs, their power grids, their industries. And every one of our states is ultimately very different, right? Water use is much more relevant in a state like Arizona than it is in places elsewhere in the alliance that I think are more focused on maybe energy use. So it's sort of dependent on sort of resource availability. And so we're helping folks sort of just like wrap their heads around what these challenges are. What does the data show? As Jane said, we've been mobilizing a lot of our communications partners to help understand where public sentiment is, help understand what the public wants from their elected leaders at the state and local level in terms of holding data center companies accountable. But what I would say is there's a lot of really great innovative work happening again across the alliance's members to protect consumers from cost impacts, to protect the environmental impacts, or protect the environment from any impacts that these data centers are going to have. There was a FERC order that came out very late last week that then sends a lot of sort of next steps for actions in this space to regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, the folks who run our grids and puts a lot of, I think, cards in the hands of state and regional regulators. So this work, I think, is not going to slow down. And it's been really sort of our pleasure and privilege to provide a space for states to coordinate and collaborate across state lines, share best practices and notes, mobilize experts to come chat with them, and also provide a forum in some spaces for direct engagement with industry. So the short answer is yes. And I imagine that that's not going to slow down anytime soon.
Thanks, Casey. Time for one more question. Joey, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Casey, for your time today, and more so your work. Totally agree. States and community action is where it has to happen in this moment. One sort of just comment slash potential model, and then a question. So fun little fact that in the early 70s, when there was the first energy crisis and energy shortages, Vermont statutorily enabled the appointment of energy coordinators to help their municipalities cut costs and save energy. So 50 years ago, now we're in another, arguably as challenging moment when it comes to energy costs and disruption in the market. Vermont has over about 120 of these mostly municipally appointed groups. It's a really cool model. And they've been doing great work. We need them more than ever. So just that's a flag and a note. And then also just curious if, knowing that a lot of the climate solutions are energy affordability solutions, more cost effective, heating, transportation, et cetera. I'm just curious if the Alliance is looking at looking at the most recent price spikes and cost disruption, supply disruptions, and organizing strategies or sort of public dialogue around clean energy as a solution to getting off of the fossil fuel roller coaster in part. So I'm just curious about any accountability or narrative or work that you're all doing to elevate the clean energy solutions, not just as climate, but as energy affordability solutions.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I really appreciate the model about the climate coordinators and would love to find an opportunity to share that out with other Climate Alliance members. I think what I would say is, yes, a lot of our core partners that we work with are doing exactly that. We work closely with folks at Climate Power, at Potential Energy Coalition, at Center for American Progress. There's basically a whole host of, I think, nonprofit organizations and climate communications firms who are doing incredible work right now to model exactly what you're talking about right now. And I'm sure Jane would be glad to sort of sorry to Jane to sort of voluntold you, but to help make any connections to some of those resources. We're actually right now working behind the scenes on sort of trying to compile all of that into a single spot to make sure that all of our members have access to sort of the affordability playbooks and solutions that are coming from a whole host of organizations who are making either broad recommendations to states on what kinds of solutions advance both climate benefits and affordability benefits, as well as I think some really great communications resources about how to communicate about this. Because again, to your point, climate solutions in many cases are affordability solutions. And I just don't know that we've really made that connection as much as we possibly can. So we are doing that. But what I would say is no one's doing that better than I think Alliance governors right now. Alliance governors are really sort of, I think, front and center right now about delivering affordability playbooks, agendas, and solutions. I know that Governor Healy in Massachusetts has put forward an energy affordability agenda to her legislature that would both accelerate things like, clean energy siting that are really critical to decarbonizing the grid. Demand load management is another great solution that they're focusing on, but also really make sure that those benefits are being felt by ratepayers, and they're delivering energy cost savings to people. Um, Again, I think we're sort of seeing that across the board, and would be glad to sort of get you some additional resources about how our governors are talking about it. We put out sort of a wrap up of all of our governors' state of the state addresses earlier this year, but the one common theme across our state of the state addresses was alliance governors are both working on cutting pollution and cutting costs. And so we're going to continue to do everything we can to empower and support our governors to tackle those two challenges. I think it is worth noting that not every climate solution is an affordability solution, and also not every affordability solution is a climate solution. And so it is incumbent, I think, on all of us to find ways to pair those together. And as Jane can tell you, at our most recent meeting, we sort of talked about this as walking and chewing gum at the same time, about figuring out where is the sort of cross section of solutions that deliver both. And in places where solutions deliver only one or the other, how can we create packages that are both delivering cost savings to consumers and advancing a lot of our emissions reduction goals?
Thanks. I appreciate that, Casey. I know, Chris, you had a quick question. You want to jump in super quick, and I know I want to leave time for Eric's presentation as well.
Yeah, just real quick, does the coalition or anybody else out there have any kind of paper that looks at how the conversion to electricity, how the energy conversion is going to match up with the explosive growth of data centers, and what that intersection looks like in terms of cost, in terms of electricity production increase needs, now factoring that in, and how this ultimately ties into benefit ratepayers. I mean, what does all that nexus look like? Because I've been looking for something like that to just try to get my head around it, and haven't seen anything so far.
I think I feel like I'm saying the short answer a lot, but I think the short answer to your question is that bits and pieces of those things exist. I think that there's certain gaps in the transparency of some data from some of these companies that I think limits the ability to create, I think, the kind of comprehensive data set that you just described. But I do know that there are some nationwide studies that look at the anticipated load growth on the nation's electricity system. I'm sure the same is happening at the state and regional level as well. Um, I think part of the cost benefit analysis is harder to quantify, in part because most of the hyperscalers have made public commitments that are not yet currently binding and enforceable, but through the ratepayer protection pledge that they signed at the White House, saying that they were going to ensure that the development of those data centers does not increase costs for ratepayers. And so I think it's a little hard to parse out how much teeth those commitments have. And that's why so much work is happening at the state and local level right now, I think, to turn those commitments into a more enforceable and binding solution. I know that FERC's action that happened late last week, again, is going to sort of, I think, tee up a lot of this at the regional transmission organization level. So I think more to come. But Chris, I think what I can sort of commit to you is that, we can get to Jane some combination of resources that get to some of the elements that you described, even if the full comprehensive picture doesn't quite exist yet.
Thanks, Casey. Okay. Casey, thank you so much for joining us today at Vermont Climate Council. Counselors know he's a resource and the Alliance is a resource, and Jane is obviously a good way to get in touch with Casey if you're interested.
And
Jane,
I should
anything else?
also,
Thanks so much.
I
Go
should
ahead.
just say, I should have just noted Jane and Melissa do a phenomenal job representing Vermont before the Alliance. And so I just want to sort of say you guys are in wonderful hands. We love working with your team. We love supporting the Scott administration and the state of Vermont as you work on embarking on your goals. And I know that you're in great hands with the Climate Action Office under Jane.
So nice.
Thanks, Casey.
Thanks, Casey.
Yeah. And just David, a turn back to you in 1 second. Appreciating Casey so much. I did just want to appreciate that he also alluded to Melissa Bailey, who I think you all know, who is the director of the Energy Office at the Public Service Department, but just wanted to echo my appreciation and how greatly I appreciate representing Vermont with Melissa. So it's both Melissa and I who join the U.S. Climate Alliance meetings on behalf of Governor Scott. So thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Okay. All right, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you for the update you wanted to provide, and we've asked you to provide on some of the emergency management issues. So, Eric, over to you.
Understanding that we're a little bit short on time, I'll try to keep it brief, but if you have any questions, just let me know or reach out. So I was asked to provide an update on our hazard mitigation program over at VEM, as well as a quick update on the FEMA Review Council. So starting with the hazard mitigation program on the buyout section, we've had 142 buyouts awarded. So those properties are done with an additional 110 in the review over at FEMA. So well over 200, which is a great number. We've had 55 of those demolished, and we have services underway for 39 additional. So that just got started, ramped up a couple months ago with the melting of the snow. So that's moving forward. On the brick 23, so this was the one that was hard to track. Basically, FEMA canceled it, then they said they didn't cancel it, then they uncanceled it. And so right now we're kind of trying to figure out what they're actually doing. We haven't got much information on it, but we have submitted our previously submitted applications, and we're waiting further information from FEMA on that. You'll see that it's a general theme that we're waiting on FEMA for certain feedback. On the brick 24 and 25, we gave priority to projects that were developed prior to the cancellation of the 23 bricks, so those have been put in. We do have getting some feedback from municipalities that their capacity is challenged with some of these requirements. So we're trying to assist local municipalities with their work on their plans. On the brick review committee, they met on June 16th. So we get the 2 million set aside. So they worked through that using a predetermined list and allocated all of that. And then we have 2 projects that we are going to submit under the nationally competitive funding strategy, which we have not done before. We were going to do one last year under the brick 23, but when the whole thing was pulled, we weren't able to. So this year we're putting in 2. One's a package of buyouts, and another is the floodplain restoration project in Montgomery. So we're looking forward to that. Again, we're not getting a huge amount of information from FEMA other than that it is on track, quote unquote. So we are moving forward as if it is on track. Local hazard mitigation planning, we have 190 municipalities that have FEMA approved local hazard mitigation plans. We have 67 that currently have expired plans, and then an additional 18 will expire at the end of this year and 74 at the end of 2027. So falling a little bit behind just because of the funding that we used to have that BRIC does not currently have. So trying to work through some additional means to help them with funding. For example, we have 63 municipalities that are awaiting the 23 BRIC funding, the one we're not hearing much about. We have 112 that are awaiting some of the funding from the 4720 hazard mitigation funding, and an additional 78 for 4810. So lined up to get funding, but we're still, as I mentioned, kind of waiting for FEMA to actually progress with those. And just a kind of a note that's interesting, half of the local hazard mitigation plans were locally funded. So that was a new tact for us because of the deficiencies in the availability of FEMA funding. We were able to plug some of those holes with local funding, which was great to keep those on track. So that was a very quick overview of what's going on in the mitigation over at VEM. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Eric. I don't know others. I get a little bit dizzy with some of the acronyms and the numbers, but I think maybe others do know what all that means, Eric. But just it's like
Good,
your
good to
daily.
know. I wasn't sure my audience on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's your daily vocabulary, and perhaps
It
others
is.
aren't sure what those other numbers. So feel free to ask folks.
Yeah.
Chris, you probably are tracking the vocabulary tightly.
Yeah, Eric, just for clarification, when you say some holes were filled with local funding for localized mitigation plans, and we did that, do you mean the towns paid for them themselves, or did the state provide? What do you mean by local funding, I guess?
The state. I believe we got through ACCD, I believe, provided some of it, I think, but it was
Okay.
a state funding, not the municipality themselves. It was a local state.
Okay, and just so folk know, and I'm not speaking for ACCD, they should speak for themselves, but as I understand, the municipal planning grants will not be funding local hazard mitigation plans going forward. I think that's the case.
Right. Yeah, so apologies about the acronyms, but in general, it's a kind of the new situation that we're in at VEM is FEMA will say that certain things are progressing, but then not really show any actual movement. So we're trying to follow them and encourage them to do what they're supposed to do, as well as all the lawsuits that are being pushed. But what we're in, and it's in this situation with mitigation, but it's also EMPG funding, or sorry, emergency management funding, is that they don't go left or right. So we can't react one way or the other. We're just having to wait for them to do something so then we can react. So it's a hard way to plan. We're making our way through it, but it's the same with mitigation, and we're making some great strides, and we're getting a lot done. And that's why I wanted to throw out a lot of those numbers, which in the abstract of the actual numbers, they're all very high comparatively to what they were. So it shows that we are making a lot of progress, and I just wanted to clarify that. So in general, that's the takeaway from this is that things are moving well, but it's not as easy as it used to be.
Thanks, Eric.
Can
Yeah,
I ask a quick follow-up question, David?
of course.
And so Eric, I'm assuming, should we wait to follow VEM's lead as far as messaging the towns that you may need to start budgeting for your own local hazard mitigation plan updates? I mean, are we waiting for you guys to message that out, or is that something we should start kind of suggesting to our towns you may want to start budgeting for?
We're working on what our messaging will be. We're also working on what some alternatives may be. So we'll reach out to the RPCs with that information first before we blast it out to the towns. So we'll make sure that we're all in the same loop.
Excellent.
All right.
Anyone else with a quick follow-up question for Eric? Any curiosity about any of those numbers or questions? Okay.
All right. So this one is probably even more outside your wheelhouse. So I'll try to take it even higher level and not throw in any acronyms. So the FEMA Review Council, as everyone knows, the administration put together a FEMA Review Council to look at basically what is going to happen to FEMA in the next couple of years. It did a lot of work. It got put on hold. It didn't submit a report. It did submit a report. So it finally submitted its final review report about a month and a half ago. And quick takeaways there's 10 of them. If I can encompass everything in the entire thing, it's that a lot more is going to be on the plate of the state than the federal government. So how that's done is different in different aspects, but that's kind of the general takeaway. The one thing the FEMA Review Council didn't necessarily do is explain how those things might be done. It kind of said what should be done, but not the how. Just to throw a little bit more on your plate, there is a legislative initiative, H4669 at the federal level, trying to reinvigorate FEMA in a different way, and that has more specificity in it, but that's working its way through slowly too. But to stay with the FEMA Review Council, there's 10 basic tenets to this that they're kind of high-level suggestions. The first one being equip the states to lead and have the federal government support. So that's kind of the general overtone of everything, right? The federal government is not supposed to be leading the charge on recovery and response. It's supposed to be the state, and if the state can't take it on, then the federal government steps in. And that's the same way theoretically that the state looks at. Local municipalities handle it first. If they can't handle it, it goes to the state and then goes to the Fed. So they're trying to kind of rebuild that. Over the last several years, it's gotten to the point where lots of states will just submit. If you're over the threshold, they'll submit whether they can handle it or not. So they're trying to kind of realign that with their expectations. So part of what they're doing to equip states is they're talking about national capability standards, professional EM, so professionalized emergency management, and then basically exercise standards. So what they're talking about is just having a comprehensive emergency management profession across the country. So we being me, EM is kind of a new profession. So we're trying to understand what that means, and when a emergency management professional steps in one state versus another, how they can do that. So it's trying to standardize that. So making it a little bit easier to move the pieces. Number two was talking about enhancing federal programs. So in that situation, think about keeping regional offices. There had been some rumors about taking away the regional offices. Talking about the logistics support. When I talk about that, I'm talking about the big white trucks that show up during flooding events, the urban search and rescue teams, the food distribution teams. They are saying that is going to stay consistent, much like the other programs. I'm waiting to see if it actually happens. And then a big one there was a disaster relief fund, which is the fund that pays for the disasters, not necessarily the mitigation side of it or the preparedness side, but the actual damages during a response. And that fund has been very low for a very long time. So looking to resupply that. And a big one here, number 3, is the criteria for disaster assistance. So everyone knows that if you hit a threshold, Vermont is 1.2 million. If you have that much damage, that's your threshold. It used to be you cross that threshold, you would get your disaster declaration. As we saw in Sutton last year, we crossed the threshold, but we did not get the disaster declaration. So maybe they're going to increase the thresholds. Maybe it's more arbitrary as to whether it passes or not. So we're trying to get some clarity on that. But their general idea is that there will be less federal disasters. So the idea is the feds only step in when it's big. They won't step in medium or small. That's the state's responsibility. So that's what I talk about, having the state needing to understand what its responsibilities are is very important here because they seem to be stepping back. They haven't specifically explained how far back, but you can see that they're clearly trying to step back. Number 4 was hazard mitigation, talking a little bit about the 15% that we usually get after a disaster. So if you get a declared disaster, whatever the number of monetary damages, you get 15% of that for mitigation projects. What they want to do is move that quicker. So they move 5% of it up to within the first 30 days. The idea that you're rebuilding stuff, you might as well rebuild it more resilient right from the start. So just get it done, get it built like it's supposed to, and be done with it. And then the other 10% would be within the first 6 months. So a narrow window. They are looking much more at you present us with a project, or the state present the feds with a project that is shovel ready, not a lot of like 5 years worth of figuring something out. More quick, get it done. You need to be ready for these things. So again, the onus is on the state to be able to do that, or the municipality. 5 is IA, that's individual assistance. So that's when individual homes gets destroyed. They're talking about condensing all the programs. Right now, there's probably 5 to 8 programs that an individual could go to across the federal spectrum. Very confusing, very complex. So trying to make that one payment, but they're also trying to cap it at 150,000. So for those that don't know, for example, right now, if your house was totally destroyed, FEMA would only pay you $40,000, regardless of what your home was worth. So it was never a total rebuild your house situation. They're trying to increase it a little bit by incorporating these other programs, but still not a very high 150,000 threshold. And only for totally destroyed homes, not for minimally damaged homes. Number 6 was public assistance program. So that's the one that pays for local municipalities, roads and buildings. That one they're talking about, interestingly enough, using some kind of parametric threshold. So it's like an insurance term where they look at if the wind in your area got to 100 miles an hour, you get X amount of dollars. Doesn't matter how much damage you actually had. That way they can just come in and say, this is X, we give you Y, where the feds were going to be gone. Their idea is that they don't want to hang around for years and years and years trying to figure out these things. So trying to make some kind of very cut and dry response plan. And honestly, it worries us a little bit because the state of Vermont's not quite like Florida. So having a overall one size fits all thing usually means that there's some people on the edges that it doesn't fit well. So we're keeping an eye on that. And then the final ones are the NFIP, trying to make that actually cost effective. Everyone knows that that's under, the National Flood Insurance Program. So if your home is in a floodplain, trying to make that actually fiscally able to pay all the things that it needs to pay. Right now it's underwater. And then 8, 9, and 10 are just talking about how they can save money, will be respent, trying to use local nonprofits more, again, pushing it down to the states. And then talking about their FEMA staffing levels and making sure that they are in line with what they think are necessary. So a little bit of, there was a large, if everyone remembers, the fork in the road memo where everyone got to retire if they wanted to or felt like they had to. Now they're hiring some of those people back, so they're trying to right size the ship. So I know that's a lot, and there's a couple different nice presentations out on Google about kind of summarizing what's going on there. It is a recommendation, so it's sitting on the president's desk. So as of right now, nothing's really happening with it. So we'll see where it goes. We're keeping an eye on it. We've submitted comments, as did several of the state emergency management associations. But right now we're just kind of waiting and seeing where it goes. So lots of things, but the general theme is they want to back out of the small stuff and only come in for the big stuff, which means that the state is left with the big stuff, which means that the state has to figure out where it's going to step in or not step in. Right? There's some dotted line somewhere that towns will want some assistance um, after a disaster, what constitutes a disaster for them, and what that means. So lots of reckoning for the state to figure out where we fall once FEMA draws their line. So.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, well that was really interesting information. We're running a little late, I recognize, and I want to make sure we have time for public comment before we break. And if there's any final reflections, I noticed Sue Minter put it in the chat. Is there a report or something that might be helpful to share on this, Eric? We could send that around afterwards, or if there's something you want to drop in the chat, like some
I can
report.
do both. I have a nice slide presentation on the FEMA changes, and then I can drop in a update on the hazard mitigation side.
That would be really helpful.
Yep.
Thanks, Eric. So I'm going to hold questions on this. I want to do something quickly, which is if you've been observing our meeting today, you're not a member of the Climate Council, but you've been observing. I want to create a space before we finish up. If there's any public comment out there for people about the topics we've been working on today and hearing updates on, any quick public comment from folks who are not members of the council? Okay, great. I'm not seeing public comment. So, counselors, as we finish up, we had hoped to have sort of a reflection of like, okay, we just heard about legislative updates. We heard what Climate Action Office is doing and all the hard work there. We heard from the Climate Alliance, and now we're heard from Eric about some of the issues around mitigation and around emergency management. Um, what does this all mean, right? We don't have time for a long discussion, but I would encourage all of us just to take 30 seconds, counselors. Think in your mind, what is one implication of everything you've been hearing today? Or maybe it's one aspect of what you've been hearing today. Just think for a second, and I'm going to ask you to drop it in the chat. And I'd love for everybody to do that. So just take a moment. What's one implication from today on your work as a council from these updates you've heard and discussed? Think about it for a second. We'll sit here in silence for 30 seconds, and then I'd love to see stuff start to drop in the chat. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
I just want to say that my comment applies not only to the Climate Council, but pretty much every aspect of my job right now, federal uncertainty and resource constraints.
I can only imagine. Yes. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Stephanie. Right. And thanks, Ari. Well put by our transportation crew. Thanks, Andrea. Right. That's right, Julie. Yep. Thanks, Kelly. Yep. Thanks, Kashka, for jumping in. Yeah. Thanks, Leslie Ann. Mm-hmm. Love that. Okay, well, these are really thoughtful reflections. We will consolidate these in our notes and get them out. I don't want to lose these. So we'll keep them in the meeting summary, and I really appreciate everybody jumping in with some thoughts here. Great. Okay. So as you all feel free to keep dropping things in the chat, I'll just say a word about next steps. We're on sort of a quarterly cadence of meetings right now, so our next one will be in the fall. I don't know, Liz Amler, if there's a date already in our calendars for that.
There is a date, it's September. The
Okay.
exact date's slipping, but I'll send it in the chat.
Great. So the steering committee will meet once or twice before then to get an agenda together and give some focus to that meeting, and also thinking about your meeting in December as well to finish up the year, right? We're in what I call is like an off year, right? Where we're not writing a plan, but there are things to do and to get ready. So stay tuned for that, and your steering committee members are the right place to go if you have some thoughts about what those meetings should look like. September 21st. Perfect. Okay. In the kind of like solstice and vibes. Um, okay, and equinox. All right. So thanks everyone. Liz Amler or Jane or anything. Am I missing anything as we finish up today? Okay. Great. All right. Well, thanks, counselors. I think this was an informative meeting. I really appreciate what's being put in the chat right now, and we will capture this and we'll keep that present for us in part of your notes going forward. With that, let's finish up. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Have a good week. Happy summer if we don't talk, and we'll see you in September.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.